What if we could place Saint Thomas Aquinas and Buddha face to face at a table to debate death? Imagine the depth of a conversation between the theologian, who believes in the eternity of the soul, and the enlightened one who understood the cycle of rebirths. Imagine the class it would be to hear firsthand their ideas about what happens when we leave this world. Well, that is exactly what you will have here. Two of the greatest thinkers in history gathered in a timeless dialogue to explore one of humanity's greatest questions. Is death an end, or just the beginning of something greater? In the silence that echoes beyond time, two figures emerge for a meeting of minds. On one side, Saint Thomas Aquinas, a man of faith and reason, whose thoughts have spanned centuries to explain the eternal purpose of existence. On the other, Buddha, the enlightened one, whose wisdom transcended suffering and revealed the path to liberation. The question that brings them together is universal, inevitable, and profoundly human. Is death a definitive end or just the beginning of something greater? A question that knows no boundaries of time, culture, or belief, and yet remains without a unanimous answer. Two paths, two perspectives, the promise of divine eternity and the acceptance of the impermanent flow. And now they meet not to prove who is right, but to illuminate what might be humanity's greatest question. What does it mean to die? The question echoes, and the debate begins. May their words inspire reflection, transcend differences, and shed light on the darkness of this mystery that unites us all, death.
Death is undoubtedly a profound mystery, but not a mystery without purpose. It is the moment when the immortal soul meets its final destiny, separating from the body that inhabited this world. Earthly life is brief, a preparation for what lies beyond. But the soul does not perish. It is eternal and naturally seeks its union with God. Death is not annihilation. It is a transition, an invitation to something greater, a reunion with the divine purpose that was given to us from the beginning. God, in His infinite wisdom, created the human soul to contemplate Him in eternity. The resurrection of the body, promised by Christ, confirms this truth. Just as He conquered death, we too will be resurrected on the last day to be judged by our actions, and finally, to partake in divine glory or eternal separation. Divine justice prevails, and each one receives according to what they sought and cultivated in this life. Death, then, does not extinguish existence. It elevates it to meet the eternal purpose. It is through death that man achieves the fullness he so desires, the union with the Creator. There is no cycle, no infinite return, only a final destiny that transcends all limitation and suffering. For those who live in the grace of God, they live forever.
Death, like life, is merely a part of the continuous flow of existence. In samsara, the cycle of rebirths, each being arises, lives, and dies in a process without beginning or end until liberation is achieved. There is no individual eternity. There is impermanence. Just as the flame of one candle lights another but is not the same flame, so our lives are conditioned by our actions but never fixed or permanent. The true question is not what happens after death, but how to live now to free oneself from suffering. Death is not the problem. It is the attachment to what we cannot hold on to that imprisons us. The desire for continuity, for immortality, creates pain and anxiety. The solution lies not in seeking eternity, but in transcending the cycle, understanding impermanence, and freeing oneself from the attachments that keep us trapped. Nirvana is not a place or an eternal state. It is the end of suffering, the cessation of desire and ignorance. It is the awakening to the truth that there is no fixed self to preserve, nor anything permanent to attain. Death is an inevitable step, but suffering can be overcome by transcending attachment. Living in harmony with impermanence is the true path to peace.
But would not this quest to free oneself from the cycle be a desire for something beyond, an aspiration for a final state, even if called nirvana? For the human soul, even in philosophy, longs for something more than impermanence. It seeks meaning and direction, and only in God can this search find rest.
This quest, St. Thomas, is precisely what imprisons. Desire, whether for nirvana or for God, must be transcended. Peace is not in what we seek, but in what we let go. Accepting death as part of the flow is accepting freedom. It is not the attachment to a final purpose, but the detachment from any fixed purpose that brings true liberation.
Allow me to delve deeper, Buddha, into what I consider the core of human hope, divine grace. Death, as feared as it may be, is not a punishment, but an opportunity granted by God. It is through death that the soul is freed from the imperfections of the earthly body and prepares for fullness. God's grace is not just a gift, it is the link that connects us to eternal love, which gives meaning to our existence. The suffering we face in life is not an end in itself, but a path to redemption. For through suffering, we are called to turn to God, to recognize our dependence on Him, and to receive His grace. Divine love, indeed, is eternal. It is in Him that the soul finds rest, away from the chaos and transience of this world. Only in God's eternal love does the soul find rest, for it is in Him that resides the perfection we all seek, even unconsciously.
Thomas, you speak of eternal love as if it were the cure for suffering, but I ask, would the very desire for eternity, even for something sublime like divine love, not be a form of attachment? Suffering does not arise only from absence, but from the attachment to what we believe we must have, and this includes the desire for transcendence, the desire for something eternal, the desire for something beyond ourselves. Detachment is the key, not only to alleviate suffering, but to understand and transcend it. When you speak of a soul finding rest in God, I see, in part, a truth. But this rest cannot come from seeking something external. Freedom lies in abandoning duality, neither beginning nor end, just the cessation of the cycle. Nirvana is not a place or a state. It is the awakening to the reality beyond extremes. It is not the end nor the beginning that matters, but the freedom from the wheel, the transcendence of any quest for permanence.
But Buddha, what is wrong with desiring what is good, what is perfect? The desire for God, for the eternal, is not like the desire for wealth or power. It does not arise from vanity, but from a thirst that is inherent to the soul. It is God who placed it there, so that we might seek Him and, in Him, find fulfillment. If desire is ordered by grace, it elevates us, does not imprison us.
Desire, even when directed toward the sublime, is still a form of attachment. The thirst for something, whether for wealth or for God, keeps the mind restless. When you speak of eternal rest, I see a projection. But what is eternal does not need to be sought. It is beyond the need for seeking or fulfillment. True peace is not in achieving, but in letting go. What remains is the freedom to simply be, without desire, without attachment, without suffering.
And yet, even in the freedom you describe, there is a paradox. For in transcending all desire, there still exists a direction, an implicit search for that liberation. Wouldn't that also be a form of longing? God, on the contrary, offers more than freedom. He offers an encounter, a love that calls us not only to transcend, but to participate in the fullness of His essence.
We call longing that which is still bound to the ego, to the illusion of a self that seeks and attains. But when the ego dissolves, longing disappears. Nirvana is not an encounter. It is the end of the need to find. It is not a denial of love, but the understanding that love is not something to be possessed or achieved, but something that simply flows when we stop clinging to any idea of self or other.
In the fragility of life, in the inevitable loss that death brings, there is a truth that consoles and gives hope, faith in eternal life. When we lose someone we love, the human heart, wounded, seeks answers, seeks meaning. Faith reveals to us that death is not the final word, but a passage, a temporary separation that prepares the way for a more perfect union in divine love. Let us think of free will, this precious gift that God has given us. It is through it that we are called to choose good, to love, to build a life that leads us to paradise. God does not force us, He invites us. With each choice, we are shaping our eternal destiny. There is no greater consolation than knowing that by choosing to live in grace, we will be reunited in eternity with those we love. If death separates us, it is only to unite us perfectly in divine love. For in paradise, there will be no more pain, no more tears, no more farewells. only the fullness of love, which knows no limits or end. Faith transforms the fear of death into hope and teaches us that, even in the face of loss, there is a greater purpose awaiting us.
When we look at death with fear, it seems like an enemy. But by understanding impermanence, we realize that fear arises from attachment, the desire to hold on to what is inevitable. It is not death that causes us suffering, but our resistance to it, our struggle against what we cannot control. The present is what we have, the only moment where life truly happens. Living in the present is accepting that everything changes, that everything passes. This is not a reason for despair, but for freedom. When we let go of what we cannot hold on to, we find a peace that transcends the fear of death. Accepting death is freeing oneself from fear. Understanding impermanence is living fully. Just as leaves fall from a tree, just as the river flows into the sea, we too are part of this great cycle. We are not separate from nature. We are nature. And when we accept this, every moment becomes precious, not because of its permanence, but because of its truth.
Buddha. I partly agree with you. Living in the present is essential, for it is in today that we shape our eternity. But I would say that the present has meaning not only in itself, but in what it prepares us for. It is the ground where we plant the seeds of our eternal destiny. The hope in eternal life does not diminish the value of now. On the contrary, it enhances it. For every act of love and kindness we perform now is a step towards the fullness that God offers us.
And I would say, Thomas, that the desire for eternity, even when cloaked in kindness, can become a distraction. When we think too much about the future, we lose what is before us. There is no need to seek a future reward. There is enough wisdom and peace in the present moment if we live it fully. Love and kindness do not need a goal beyond themselves. They are the very path.
Perhaps we are closer than it seems, Buddha. For in love, there is something that transcends time, something that reflects the very eternity of God. Whether in the acceptance of impermanence or the hope of the eternal, love is undoubtedly what gives meaning to life and to death.
Yes, Thomas. Love, when it is detached, when it does not seek to possess, is what frees us from fear, connects us to the present, and allows us to live in peace, even in the face of death. For after all, it is in freedom and acceptance that we find true fulfillment.
As our conversation progresses, Buddha, I realize that we speak of different paths, yet we are driven by a common quest, the desire to understand life and death, and to offer humanity hope in the face of mystery. To me, faith is that beacon that illuminates the unknown. It gives us direction when reason alone cannot reach. Even in uncertainty, faith sustains us, like a foundation that cannot be shaken. When I think of death, I see it as a threshold, a moment of transition, yes, but also of encounter. It is there that the soul, free from the burdens of earthly pains, finds its true nature, created for union with God. We are not a random occurrence, nor an infinite cycle without direction. We are part of a greater plan, a creation moving towards perfection. Life does not end with death, but finds its final purpose in eternity. God calls us to live with hope, to look beyond pain and loss, and to trust that there is something more, something that transcends any human limitation. For God's love knows no end, and it is in this love that we find our answer, our reason for existence. Thus I leave this message. Live with faith, love deeply, and know that the purpose of your lives goes far beyond what the eyes can see.
Thomas, your faith in eternity is undoubtedly a noble path. But for me, the question is not about what lies beyond death, but about what we can understand and live now. Death, like life, is merely part of a continuous flow. It is not a period at the end, nor the beginning of something new, but a natural change, as inevitable as sunrise and sunset. It is the attachment to this life, to this identity, and to the desire for something eternal that causes suffering. Freeing oneself from this attachment is finding true peace. Death is part of the flow, and the end of suffering lies in the liberation from all duality. There is no enduring self, nor something to be achieved. There is only the freedom that arises when we let go of all illusions, when we accept impermanence. Fear dissolves. There is no need to cling to a future, nor to mourn what is fleeting. Everything is transient, but this transience is not emptiness. It is the essence of life. True peace is not in the beginning or the end, but in the freedom of both. So live in the present, accept what you cannot control, and discover that peace is not something distant, but something that has always been here within reach of those who liberate themselves.
I deeply respect your perspective, Buddha, and see in it a practical wisdom that can alleviate human suffering. However, for me, the freedom you describe can only be complete when it is rooted in divine love. For love is not an illusion or an attachment, it is the very reflection of God within us, and it is in Him that the soul finds its true liberation.
And I would say, Thomas, that love, when free from desires and possessions, is what connects us to the present, to others, and to the whole. We do not need to seek its source outside of ourselves, but to recognize it in everything that is. There is no self nor other. There is only the flow, of which we are a part, where love simply is.
Perhaps in love we can find a point of convergence, even if through different paths, for it is, without a doubt, what gives meaning to life and death.
I agree, Thomas, and perhaps love is indeed the bridge between the eternity you seek and the flow I embrace. For in the end, what truly matters is not what lies beyond death, but how we live while we are here.
Two paths, two truths, one same mystery. Saint Thomas Aquinas and Buddha shared with us not only their perspectives on death, but also profound teachings on how to live our lives. From Aquinas, we take the idea that death is not the end, but a transition to something greater, an encounter with the eternal love that gives meaning to our existence. He reminded us of the importance of purpose, free will, and faith as a beacon that guides our choices. From Buddha, we learn to accept impermanence as part of the natural flow of life. He showed us that death does not need to be feared but understood, that freeing ourselves from attachment and living fully in the present is the path to true and lasting peace. And now the question returns to you. Is death an end or a new beginning? How do these ideas resonate with the way you view life, your choices, and even moments of farewell? Perhaps the answer is not only in the words of Aquinas or Buddha, but in the way you integrate these teachings into your own journey. How do you deal with the mystery of death, seeking purpose, or accepting the flow? Share your reflection in the comments. Do you believe that death leads us to an eternal purpose, or that it is just a natural part of the cycle of life? How can these views transform the way you live now? If you enjoyed, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who also needs to reflect on the meaning of life and death. After all, great debates do not end here. They continue within us, in our decisions, in our conversations, in our actions. Remember, perhaps death is neither the end nor the beginning. Perhaps what truly matters is how these ideas transform who we are now. Until the next episode of The Great Debates, where we explore the greatest questions that shape humanity, may your reflections today inspire your journey tomorrow.